another Scottish Greens podcast. I'm Lorna Slater, one of the co-leaders of the Scottish Green Party.
Hi Lorna, I'm Daisy Narayanan. I am I'm so sorry, this is just meant to happen, wasn't it? This is because I'm going to talk about transport. You hear transport in the background. I'll start again. I'm Daisy Narayanan. I'm an architect, an urban designer. And for the past 8 years, I've been working with Sustrans, which is a sustainable transport charity. So I work in sustainable transport. I'm so pleased to be here and lovely to speak to you.
Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. This podcast is one of a series that we're doing about the future of Scotland and having a positive vision for what Scotland can be in the future, because there's so much doom and gloom around. We want to build something better, and before we can do that, we need to know what better looks like. So do you want to go a little bit more about your work, Daisy?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, for the past 8 years, I've been working with Sustrans, which is a sustainable transport charity. So we want to make it easier for people to walk and cycle. We want to put people right at the heart of place and placemaking. And I think that speaks so much to, what you were saying about what the future of Scotland could look like. And I suppose it's worth saying at this point that, from my perspective, from a Sustrans perspective, this isn't about the politics of what Scotland could look like. Whether it's an independent Scotland or Scotland remains with the rest of the UK or part of the EU or whatever the future looks like. For me, there is an issue about transport in general and the fact that transport habits have to change in Scotland, and that right now we have a huge opportunity to work together and make that change happen. And I like what you said there, what does good look like? And I think that's something that all of us are now discussing and talking about as we come out of COVID, as the restrictions are easing. And again, I find that, this is a time to be talking about what does this mean for the future.
And we're both so lucky to live in Edinburgh, but both of us come from opposite sides of the world yes. to end up living here. I could never have guessed growing up as a child in Calgary in Canada that I would end up spending my adult life living in a wonderful city like Edinburgh, halfway around the world. How about you, Daisy? What's your journey to get here been like?
Yes, it's been quite an interesting journey. And Calgary, what a beautiful place it is. I visited Calgary over 10-15 years ago now, and I completely fell in love with the hills. And
really?
It's just
with
beautiful.
The mountains?
The mountains. Did I say hills?
Oh yeah, because the city itself is like Houston, but cold. It's like all concrete jungle.
No, just outside of the city. It's just beautiful.
The mountains are amazing.
Yeah, my journey has been an interesting one. So I grew up in India. Well, I was born in India and I grew up in Southeast Asia and Indonesia for 6 years. Came back because my parents wanted me and my brother to have an Indian education. Studied architecture, and then I worked in Singapore for a while, lived in America, in Alabama for 2 years, and then Atlanta. So that was an interesting couple of years. And then I came to Edinburgh actually to do my master's degree for a year. It was meant to be for a year, and this is in 2004. And when you come to a city like Edinburgh, and then yes, as you can see, I've stayed. You come to Edinburgh, and I still remember, I talk about this a lot. You come out of the station and you turn around and you see that incredible skyline, and it is it's very, very difficult not to fall in love with the city. It's just absolutely wonderful. I met my now husband at university, and 2 Scottish children later, I'm still here. And when the weather is rubbish, I say to him, "Oh God, this is your fault. We could be in a tropical paradise somewhere." But no, I absolutely love the city. It's I was going through a difficult time when I came here to do my master's degree, and this place just envelopes you, and it kind of gives you the space to think about who you are and what you want to do. And I think, for me, Edinburgh is always going to be special wherever I live, in the world. It's a very special place.
I can definitely identify with that. Yeah, Edinburgh is certainly something special. So how has that journey translated into your career now in environmental design?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this the other day. So as I said, I've lived in different cities. I've been so lucky. I've had the good fortune to have lived in so many different cities. And, growing up in Bombay or Singapore, you realize that so much about the quality of your life is based on how you're able to move around. And I think that realization has come to me since working for Sustrans. So in Bombay and Singapore, as I said, I used to take public transport everywhere and not even think twice whether it was late in the night. You feel safe, so you have a certain quality of life knowing that you're safe. When I lived in America, it was a beautiful little town. But to go to the neighborhood shop, I had to jump in a car to nip to the shop to buy a pint of milk. And my exercise was, driving up to the mountains in the south and close to Chattanooga, and walking around the lake over there. It was just this. It was such a car-dominated lifestyle, which you don't even think about because that's what it's like. And I wasn't well. I wasn't mentally well. I wasn't physically well. I was, it just didn't feel right. And then I came to Edinburgh. And the hills of Edinburgh, you're walking everywhere. I was a poor student, so got a bike. You discover the city in a completely different way, and then moving to London, suddenly you realize that a bike just shrinks the city. You're able to travel from, I was from Battersea to Farrington at the time, an hour and a half on the tube, but 45 minutes on a bike.
I've heard that the fastest way around London is by bike. They prove it over and over again. Yeah.
Absolutely, and you see so much of the city as well. But then, sorry, just to come back to your question, is I think just thinking about that, the fact that how you travel shapes so much of your life, and the quality of your life is so dependent on what you're able to do within getting from A to B to C. So I think that's one of the main factors and main motivating factors for me to focus on transport within the wider environmental agenda. So I worked in the private sector as an architect for a few years in Edinburgh and then London, and all that throughout that we would talk about, so how do people get there? So what is the access requirement for this building, as an example? And it was always about the car. It was always about how does a car get here, or how does a van get here? And it was so rare that someone would say, but then, what are your pedestrian connections? It was almost like an afterthought. And that to me, is the fact. What is interesting to me now is over the past few years, that narrative has shifted completely, and more we're seeing that walking and cycling is much higher up in the agenda, and it's no longer seen as, oh, you're just a cyclist. You are part of an ecosystem that makes a place better when done well.
I mean, I've got a couple of points I want to kind of come to you on. Something I want to ask you about. Before that, I just want to make a comment about the so I'm glad to hear that you're getting more sort of chat about cyclists and stuff, because my experience is that it's really poor. I work in a corporate building downtown when I do go into the office, and the basement is a parking garage, which is nearly always empty. And the bike racks are poorly laid out. They're in a bad place, and they're rammed full. The provision, they've over provided for cars and under provided for bikes, but actually it's in Edinburgh city centre. Almost nobody drives, and it's the landlord won't change it.
Yeah,
it's the provision for a car. You're right. When people think transport, there's still this kind of transport equals car thing.
Yes.
Something that I've heard about that I want to ask you about is the concept of a 15-minute city.
Yes. Absolutely.
Can you tell us a bit more about that? What does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So you just pick up your point about the fact that things are changing. I think it'll take a while to see that change on the ground, because I think the narrative shift is happening, over the past couple of years. But that to translate, those conversations and that change in attitude to what you see on the ground is going to take a while. And that to me is, we're at a critical point right now where, policies are saying the right things. There's investment now across governments, into walking and cycling. But we need to make that into a reality on our local streets. And we need to do that now, because again, we're talking within, I've talked about COVID, but obviously, we're facing a climate crisis. So we need to make sure that that happens now. The acceleration that is required right now. 15-minute city, yeah. I mean, so in Sustrans, we're working on what we call the 20-minute neighborhood principle. And it's not a new principle. As urbanists, as urban designers, the 20-minute neighborhood principle has been around for a while. Paris has taken that principle and it's made that into the 15-minute city. So, regardless of whether it's 15 minutes or 20 minutes, the whole concept of what that means is about living locally. So having your amenities within a 15-20 minute walk or a cycle away. And what I find quite interesting, and I've talked about this before as well, is during lockdown, the height of lockdown, in a sense, we were forced to live this 20-minute neighborhood principle, this 15-minute city principle, because that was, we had to live locally. And I think people have seen what that brings. You've had a little taste of, finding your local parks. I've seen I've seen architectural bits and buildings close to where I live, which I had never noticed before. You start to discover your neighborhood, your locality in a completely different way. But for a 20-minute neighborhood or 15-minute city principle to work, what has to happen is that planning and transport, economic development, it has to be a holistic way of approaching how you design that place. And again, I say this a lot. My husband calls me a relentless optimist because I can see that change is coming, and more you see different departments speaking to each other. Planning and transport in Edinburgh, the city mobility plan and the transport plan have both gone out to consultation at the same time as two interlinked documents, which I have never seen happen before. So to me, there is that big strategic piece of what kind of place do we want to live in, and the 15-minute city or the 20-minute neighborhood principle encapsulates that living locally, the joys of discovering how you can live locally.
So is there a kind of definition as to what sort of things we should all have within 20 minutes of our home? I'm guessing it's things like a clinic, a library, a restaurant, some shops, a school, sports facilities. Like, is there kind of a list of what kind of amenities we're talking about?
Yes, so different cities are doing it differently. So they have data sets that are specific to their places. So Melbourne's got a really lovely little wheel that talks about hospital, a park, a school, your shops, local shops, a theatre, place for culture, a community hub. So everything that you would require to lead a good life, is within your 15-minute or 20-minute neighborhood. And to me, that's the thing. Some people have said, but then does that not restrict you? Does that not make you, what if, I have a coffee shop I love, which is, half an hour away across town. But to me, that's not, you're not precluding anything from happening. What you're doing is providing people with a choice of having that life close by and close to you. What it also does is it allows the change, coming back to transport, that the change of mode to happen. So your streets are far friendlier for people on foot and bike. Somebody with a physical or a sensory impairment or disability, your streets are far more welcoming, they're greener. So it's that kind of ethos that a 15-minute city is trying to achieve. It's putting people right at the heart of place and placemaking.
And I think it's unwinding this commuter culture. So I told you I grew up in the city of Calgary, and many of my school friends still live there. And of course, they've got families and houses of their own now. And the number one complaint that when you get together, sort of to chat with your old pals, is their commutes, because they all live in big suburban houses out in the outskirts of town, and commute, hours by car into the town centre or to wherever they're working. And it seems to me that we've sacrificed hours, days, cumulative days of our lives. And when I say, well, I walk to work, if I go into the office at all, I walk to work, or if the weather's really awful, I'll take the bus, and I'm there in 20 minutes. And I'm in the heart of the city, so I can do all the things that I've got. And it was sort of radical. It's radical. My parents think I'm a radical because I've never owned a car, because I choose. Well, I'm except that I have a bunch of privilege there, but I've chosen to live not in a big suburban house. I live in a very relatively modest flat in the city centre, so that I don't have to use a car. But that was a pretty big choice to have to make, obviously. Most people, especially if you've got kids, you want a garden, you need a few more bedrooms, you need a bit more space than I can live with. And So there's a big thing about the commuter culture, but I'm not completely sure that commuter culture ever did have people at the heart. I think it probably had developers and capitalists at the heart. It's much cheaper to just take a field and fill it full of identikit houses and sell them on than it is to work with government to plan, well, we need to be close to the hospital, we need to make sure that there's, we got new neighborhoods, we're going to need a school, we're going to need to coordinate routes for that. Like, it's just harder. And capitalists want to make money quickly and easily, and they don't do it. So this is not a small shift that we're talking about.
No, not at all. It isn't at all. And, there is a huge conversation to be had about housing, about affordable housing, about, and how the way we've designed our places to embed car dependency within how we live has to shift. It has to shift if we are to meet any of our climate obligations, if we are to meet any of our climate aspirations that we have in Scotland, or Edinburgh Council, carbon neutral by 2030. I sit on Edinburgh's Climate Commission, and there are some really tough choices that the city will have to make going forward. And that conversation needs to happen across the board. It can't just be a local authority led conversation or a citizen-led conversation. The private sector has to be part of that conversation and has to make changes to how things have been. The status quo is just not working. And to pick up your point about commuter culture, absolutely. So when I think it was 2013, and we had this moment of, right, my son's growing up and we need a big house and a garden, and so we did that traditional thing of or the typical thing. We bought this lovely, beautiful cottage in East Lothian, because that's what we could afford away from the city. You go 5 miles out, 5 miles out, 5 miles out, and this gorgeous, gorgeous place. But I don't drive. I still don't drive. I had enough of driving in the US, and when I came here, I said, I want to live in cities where I can hop on a bus or walk or cycle anywhere. And suddenly you realize how, you're so locked into that dependency on your car. And it just wasn't right for me. So we moved back to the city. And as you said, we made the difficult choice of coming back into a city, moving into a flat with a growing family. I've got 2 kids. But I couldn't be happier. The kids cycle to school just around the corner from where I live. I have everything at my doorstep. I live in the city centre of Edinburgh. The parks are right here. And as you sing, I go to work, and there's something where we need to take that experience that somebody like me has had, and work with the planning strategies, the national planning framework, right down to the local planning the strategies, to see how can we get more families back into the city centres, back into our town centres, start to make sure
get the amenities out.
Exactly.
Like, why should all the amenities be in one place?
Yeah.
Because that would give us much more choice. People want to live in the suburbs, great, they want a bit more space around them, but they still need a hospital, a school, a shop,
Exactly.
They still need all those things. And
within 15, 20
again,
minutes.
with developers, so there needs to be a different way of organizing the planning.
But
So
it's changing.
me-
It's changing, Lorna. I promise you.
And I'm really glad to hear that. So both of us are, I would go so far as to say, radical feminists. How does gender come into this?
Gender. So yes, we are indeed radical feminists. So for me, it is so important that women, or somebody like me, a person of color, we are at the table when these decisions are being made, or we are at the table to shape some of the conversations happening. We're at the table when policies are being decided. When I joined the transport sector in 2012, I remember I've written about this. Feeling quite shocked at how few women there were at meetings I attended. For example, I was sometimes the only woman in a big room of men doing transport.
White men, I expect.
And many times I was the only person of color. So, and that is changing. There are more women now who are leading from the front, who are actual role models. The Active Nation Commissioner for Scotland, for example, Lee Craigie, she's an incredible, amazing, inspirational woman. So again, things are changing, but we have in Sustrans we did a piece of research called "Are We There Yet?" and that was looking at gender across all policy and design and engineering and community work, and we have a long way to go, to be truly inclusive in how we shape our places. And to me, that's the thing. You cannot exclude almost half of the population when you are designing a place that has to cater for everyone. So yes, I think we have a long way to go where we can be truly inclusive. But unless we are truly inclusive across the board, we can't make places that work for everybody. So I'm very, very passionate about making sure that that I can be a voice for other women who want to get into transport, who don't see transport as this macho, boring thing where you're just talking about curbs and engineering stuff. We should be part of that change making. Yes, exactly.
So there was a great little film that did the rounds on the internet a few years ago now about policy on clearing snow in Sweden. It was in Swedish. I forget which Swedish city.
Invisible Women. That was from the book, wasn't it?
Was it? Okay.
In the book
Can you tell us about that? It's just such a good concrete example of gendered policy.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't remember the statistics offhand, but there was this narrative about wanting to make sure that it was more inclusive. And in Sweden, there's examples of what's happening in Vienna, where the women deputy mayor came in and made some big sweeping changes. But in Sweden, they decided that if you get the snow off the pavements when you're gritting, rather than prioritize the roads, where you prioritize your pavements, then they said, let's see what happens, because they're trying to make sure that it was a more inclusive street. And the results were extraordinary, because suddenly you realize how many more women are used to walking rather than jumping in a car. And that gender split was so obvious, and then it led to all kinds of knock-on benefits, in terms of accident statistics and just people's participation in that kind of reshaping. I keep going back to the word of reshaping how we live and how we design our places, and it's incredible. I think there is a reference to it in the book Invisible Women, and it's just an incredible book. For you listeners,
well, we had quite a significant win for transportation and gender in Lothian with the prams on the buses.
Yes.
So were you around when that was going on?
Mm-hmm.
This was a fantastic campaign. That there is, and rightly so, spaces on buses for wheelchair users. Fantastic. I'm definitely on board with that. But the problem was you couldn't have a wheelchair user and a pram.
Yes.
You couldn't have both of those things. So then there was a massive campaign to make sure that there were spaces for both, because mothers, it tends to be mothers,
yes.
It tends to be gendered. Mothers with children often can't afford cars. That is, in the neighborhood I live in, there's car owners are a minority, and we have lots of kids. People take their kids on buses. That's a thing. But people who design buses are normally men, engineers who delegate their child rearing to
yes.
women and own cars. So I'm sure they never thought that anyone would try and take a pram on a bus. People take prams on the buses all the time, and that was a really exciting campaign. And I'm so glad they won. As you
yes.
say, there is some things that are happening. To this day, we have prams on buses in Edinburgh. It's brilliant.
Absolutely. And I'm quite wary of saying, my husband is a primary caregiver for my kids because I work, and in a sense we are kind of turning societal norms on its head, because he's a writer and he's a full-time dad, and he said to me, how sometimes you're waiting at a bus stop, and there's somebody in a wheelchair, and then there's only one space, and then then you have to make that decision between yourselves who gets on the bus. And how is it that in 2020 that is the kind of decisions that we're having to make getting on public transport? So yeah, absolutely. I think, and I absolutely love Lothian buses. And for someone who's lived in Huntsville, Alabama, without access remotely, even the thought of getting on a bus, to live in a city here where it's such a leveler. It's such everyone takes the bus. Whether you're a politician or you're a key worker or a teacher. Everyone takes the bus, and I love that. Absolutely love that.
There's that wonderful phrase, isn't it, that in a successful city of the future, it's not that the poor will drive cars, it's that the rich will take public transport.
Exactly. I think it's Enrique Peñalosa who's being credited with this line, but it's lovely. Love it.
So what is the vision then? What is, if you could wave your magic wand
Yes.
and bring us the future of Scotland's transportation tomorrow, what would it look like, Daisy?
Well, it's a big question. I think first of all, if I had a magic wand, I would be able to bring everybody, whether you work in transport or planning or social justice or communities or schools, everyone around the table to say what do we want to see happen, and then that is a collaborative vision. So first and foremost, I think whatever happens in the future has to be truly collaborative, because it won't work otherwise. If I had a magic wand in Edinburgh, I would wave it, and then through magic you would have a fully separated cycle network across the city. Because
That's what
then
we need.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll get there, but we need it now. And any cycle network is only as weak as its worst link. So get the junction sorted. Let's get all of that sorted. So at a macro level, I think a truly collaborative future where we're not fighting against each other to for crumbs to put in walking and cycling infrastructure. The economy is as much part of the discussion when we're talking about transport and walking and cycling, as is health, as is the air quality, as is, all of that has to come as one conversation. And at a micro level, yes, I need more cycle paths so my kids can enjoy. I come back to, during the lockdown, we had such an amazing time, my son and I. We go down the North Edinburgh path, but it was so busy because, during lockdown, everyone was using that. So we decided to enjoy the city streets and, just to explore, go up the mount and go down to the meadows and, the city centre. It's just amazing with the kids to be able to do that. And I remember that moment where the traffic started to come back, and, that there was that one day where I said to the kids, sorry, got to go back on the pavement, and they're little, so it's okay. But that sinking feeling in my heart where you think,
this isn't safe anymore. For a little while it was safe and wonderful, but it's not safe anymore.
Yeah.
We don't prioritize children. We don't prioritize children. We prioritize big trucks. Yeah.
Hopefully.
Well, and I read the statistic that being killed by a car is the most common cause of death of children between the ages of 5 and 14. So the Germans call it Kindermord.
Yeah.
But the fact that cars kill kids, that's a fact. It's one of those sort of hideous facts, and that our society seems to just accept it, that some amount of death is necessary.
It's acceptable. Yeah,
unbelievable.
I mean, that's what made the catalyst of the change in Amsterdam, was in the Netherlands, was the protest against children dying in the 70s.
In the 70s?
I think it was
right,
the 70s,
so only
something.
50 more years for it.
But we just learned the lessons, and we just bypass the 40 odd years and then crack on and do it.
Okay, so most of our listeners are members of the Scottish Green Party, but of course if they're listening to my podcast, they'll be interested in green issues.
Yeah.
What can they do to help? What should people who support this vision for what we want Scotland's transportation to look like, what should they be doing?
They should be more engaged than ever right now. Write to your local MSP, write to your councillors, write to anyone with the decision-making power to say this is what we want. Because so often we see that projects are put on the ground where a very small but very vocal minority get their way, because most people just go, it'll be fine. And I feel so strongly about this, the community participation aspect, because I come from a country where things just happen around you. Things are built. You don't really have a say. There is no community engagement framework, or there wasn't when I lived in India. And to me, living here, where you have that, you have that opportunity to shape what your street could look like, it's such a privilege. It's such an immense privilege. And I understand consultation fatigue. And, when I led the City Centre Transformation Project in Edinburgh, I was in secondment at the council. And so much, I heard so much of, but we've answered this question 10 years ago. You're asking this again. And there is that fatigue. However, I would urge everyone to please remain engaged and please keep asking for better streets and for better places for all of us, because we don't deserve any less than that.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today, Daisy. It's been absolutely brilliant.
Thank you, Lorna. Thanks for having me.
In life,